Hi everyone, welcome to An Hour with LawSikho. This is Ramanuj Mukherjee back with you on today evening with a very special guest. We have with us Shruti Ghai, who is going to talk about basically the area of discussion today is around leasing of employees. Now, you might have heard of this term before, employee lease, but this is a huge industry and it happens a lot, especially in trans-border transactions. And in and Nishta is going to tell us actually a lot about that today, how it works, especially what is the legal side of it, what should employment lawyers or HR managers learn about lease of employees. Okay, so without much ado, let's welcome Nishta and ask her more about this. Nishta, before you begin, very welcome, and why don't you tell us more about your background? And I know that you do this as a day-to-day activity, a lot of legal work around this. But before we go much deeper into that, tell us about yourself.
So, hi Ramanuj and hi everyone else. This is actually Shruti. I am Shruti Ghai and I
Wow,
have done.
really strange. Okay, I'm so sorry, Shruti.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So, I have done a major part of my schooling from Pune. Post that, I have done my BSL LLB from ILS Law College, Pune. So, post that, I joined Tech Mahindra as a campus placement and I have been working at Tech Mahindra ever since.
Great. So I am guessing Tech Mahindra is known as one of the leaders in the service, IT services industry. So as a lawyer, what sort of work do you have to do there as an in-house counsel?
So Tech Mahindra is actually amongst the top 5 IT companies of India. But what we majorly do is, as in-house counsel, we support everything when it comes to lawyering, from employment matters to arbitrations to litigation support, then your daily commercial contracting. If there is any issue anywhere or anyone needs any legal advice, supporting the sales team, the delivery team, and any other team that you can think of. So basically, what we do is something we call as end-to-end lawyering. We deal with all the matters that can ever come up in a company.
Got it, Shruti. So, how do you, what is this lease of employees and how does it work? If you can enlighten us about that.
Sure. So when we talk about employee leasing, a lot of people use very different terms for this. Across Europe, they call it temporary agency work. Some people call it employee leasing. People also call it manpower leasing. But effectively, all these nomenclatures mean the very same thing. So what happens is, when you enter into a contract, usually you must have heard that contract is for services. Now, in the form of services, we also, some companies provide something known as skill set. So a lot of companies say there's a company XYZ, they want someone to develop a certain application and they don't have those capabilities in-house. So what they do is they find a supplier who has employees who can actually develop it. So what the supplier does is, under a master services agreement, or basically a commercial contract, this supplier leases its employees to the customer. Now, these employees who are being leased to the customer, they are working on the instructions of the customer. They are developing something which the customer wants as per the instructions of the customer. And this service provider actually bills the customer on hourly basis. Basically, the efforts that these employees put in, so these are billed to the customer. So effectively, the services that are being provided by the service provider are releasing of employees. You are giving skill set.
So, why is, like we know that there has been a lot of problem related to migration of workforces, Indians working abroad, and there's an anti-migrant uh, sort of, sensitivity around the world, in Singapore, in US, in UK. How is employee leasing? It sounds like something that would work with respect to Indian companies leasing this kind of manpower to companies abroad. Do you think this is something under threat given the global sentiment right now?
So when we talk about employee leasing, okay, India being an outsourcing economy, we do deal with such, engagements. But what also happens is it's just not India. Employee leasing is a concept which is there across the globe, and a lot of countries actually have certain licenses for this. So if you want to perform employee leasing services, you have to get those respective licenses, and a lot of local companies do this across the globe. Where
Shruti,
it
I'll stop you for a moment. For some reason, your video is not coming through on our like on our YouTube video. Can you just check? I mean, have you given the? I can see it, but have
Okay.
you clicked or given all the required permissions for it to be visible? Uh,
I don't know. I have given the permissions that were required.
okay.
Let me just check. I don't see any issue with the permissions here.
All right. So you continue. Anyway, somehow is a channel, but yours is not. I mean, I don't understand what could be the reason possibly. But anyway, let's continue. I guess. Yeah. I can see you though. I mean, I don't know why it is you are not visible on the video.
I have no idea why everyone else can't see me.
Okay, please continue.
Uh, so what I was mentioning is that this is not just about India being an outsourcing economy. This is something that is prevalent across the globe. So when we talk about employee leasing, okay, so for employee leasing, you need not send your employees on site for that. This is something that can be done probably offshore also. But when we talk about migration, changes coming in over there, so I see that impacting the entire economy as a whole, and not just employee leasing services. So all kinds of services that we perform, even if it's a fixed deliverable based service. So now if any company is providing that, what happens is that some part of it is offshore, some part of it is onshore. So ultimately when there are issues with visa and visa is being denied, then you're trying to ensure that there are not too many people who are migrating to different countries. So it's all kinds of services that get impacted, and majorly the issue is India's outsourcing economy. India labor is cheap, so a lot of people, a lot of companies across the world like outsourcing their work to India.
Got it. So, how would you say is that India's, like how about employee leasing within India? Do you see a lot of it happening? Is it like I can see a lot of situations where companies would like to have employees leased on a certain period of time from another company. Is that a possibility?
So I think that is a possibility, but I think India also has regulations called CLRA, the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act, which is a 1970 act. Now that act does not really, that only applies to workmen, but somewhere this issue of so basically what happens is when you talk about employee leasing, it turns into an issue of disguised employment. That is the reason most of the countries are coming up with laws around this. India, when we actually came up with this law, we were more centered on protecting the rights of the perennial workers. So there is not much that regulates this currently in India, but I believe in India also this is possible, but more or less I see this as something that happens in outsourcing economy. Within India, we have more than enough skill set. What happens is outside India, the skill set that India has, that is more or less required somewhere. That's the reason we, actually rely on a lot of international contracts, and we get a lot of business from outside India.
Do you foresee that at some point, as there are more specialized, there are specialized skills, like for example, digital marketing is a specialized skill, and there are some people who are extremely good at digital marketing and they've really learned it. And what happens is that companies want the digital marketer to be sitting in their office rather than uh, rather than actually being in an off-site location, because sometimes being in the office gives a better access to them, to that particular employee. So this off-site, on-site, how does it work with employee leasing? Like, is it necessary that the employee leasing has to be off-site, or necessary that it has to be on-site? I mean, how does it really work?
So when we talk about employee leasing, the key thing over here is who is instructing these employees. So now what happens in employee leasing is you give your employees to the customer, and the customer is the one who instructs these employees. Your obligation in the commercial contract is just to give a certain skill set. Now how those skill sets are being utilized and what needs to be done, what services are required, that is something that is entirely at the discretion of the customer. Now of course, in such situations, the customers usually prefer that the people that are getting leased to them are actually working from their premises. So the customers, I think the reason that the customers would want to instruct the employees would also be that these employees would have to work in harmony with the employees of the customer. So if these people who are being leased to the customer have to work with the employees of the customer, they are working under the instructions of the customer, it is definitely much easier and better for the customer if they're working from the customer premises. So I think what happens in these situations is more or less that they have to work from the customer premises. But again, what happens is a lot of countries across the globe are now coming up with new regulations in which they're trying to restrict this. Because what usually happens is now a customer wants a developer, say, for 2 years. So the customer takes this developer from a third company, uses the developer for those 2 years, and the developer goes back to its original company. Now what the customer could have actually done is hired someone for those 2 years. So when someone is actually leasing resources, you are avoiding taking someone on your payroll, because you need someone to develop something for you for a period of, say, 2 years. But after the expiry of 2 years, you don't need that person anymore. So what is happening is it's more or less somewhere becoming an employee issue. This it's turning into employment issues and all of that. So that is the reason I think, what if I had to review a contract which is talking about labor leasing, I would specifically put in clauses which talk about retaining the employer's authority. Because ultimately what happens is this employee who is getting leased is working from the customer premises, is working on customer instructions, is sitting with the customer employees. And if such an employee sees that the customer is paying better to its employees, such a employee would try and claim employment with the customer. So I somehow see this as an employment issue also.
That's correct. But before we go into much deeper into that, can you enlighten us on what are the circumstances that are compelling companies to lease employees rather than actually hire their employees full time or part time for that matter? Why involve a professional employer in the middle?
That's just an easier option. So if you have to take someone on your payroll, you have to take care of all the taxes, you have to give the benefits, you have to ensure that once the assignment is over, there is some other assignment that is given to that person. Basically all your employer's obligations, that's what you're avoiding when you are taking someone on lease. So effectively, if I want to lease someone and I'd say I need this skill set for a period of 1 year, for that 1 year I don't have to deal with paying salary, I don't have to deal with providing benefits, I don't have to deal with PF, I don't have to deal with any other employer's issue. I don't even have to bother about what leaves that person is taking, whether that's authorized or what happens to that. So all of that, basically it's a headache that I don't have to take care of.
So it's basically you are outsourcing the administrative effects and the aspects of your employees. So if you hire it through a professional employer who's only leasing their employees, so you then have the workforce without having to take responsibility for that workforce. And I think
Exactly.
why in India we have, we need to have a contract labor act, because in the factories there are certain obligations. Like you cannot fire 100 laborers at once. If you do that, then it attracts retrenchment. You cannot do it. It's simply you will go to the court, and court will not allow you to fire those people. So then you hire through contract labor so that you can fire whenever you want. So it looks like an apparatus which is used to kind of give you the power to fire people without too many consequences. Would you?
Yes, that's correct. I totally agree with that view because what happens is there's retrenchment, there's layoff, all those concepts is something that you don't need to bother. For, on paper, what is happening is you are indulging another company to provide you services. You don't need those services anymore, you just terminate the services. So effectively, it is a way that you're trying to find around the law. That is the only thing that I feel about India is we do have a CLRA, but that is restricted to workmen. So, and workmen, when you look at the Industrial Disputes Act, it is someone who is getting paid less than, say, 6,500. So now there are so many big establishments. There are MNCs. There are so many of them in India. There are so many startups also, in fact, who are employing.
It is below minimum wages in most of the states now.
Yes, that is true. So effectively, what is happening is that that act does not apply to many circumstances. It's the application is very limited. So now, see, Maharashtra government has amended that act and it has changed the minimum number of employees from 20 to 50. But that's also not making much of a difference because effectively, what is happening is there's a very easy way around it. So the protection that needs to be given to these workmen, that is something that is still missing in spite of us having laws to try and protect them.
Got it. So basically, smaller agencies as well as people who are paying above a certain salary an absolutely free hand into not anyway. Retrenchment provisions do not apply unless you are a manufacturing unit or a factory. So I think that way, we may see a lot of employment leasing happening, employee leasing happening in India. But somehow it is not so common, in a domestic, scenario. Do you think any could one reason could be that it's very difficult to hire foreign talent, but when you do it through employment leasing through another company, it's a little easier to do. Would you say that's the case?
I don't think so. So basically, what happens is if you want to hire someone, if you want to hire foreign talent, you need to have presence in that country. So I cannot say Ireland. I, being a company, cannot hire someone in Ireland unless I have a company in Ireland who can actually, issue offer letters. So basic of employment is you have to fulfill all the employer's obligation. Now, if you don't have presence over there, you cannot fulfill those obligations, you cannot hire someone. So if you are leasing someone, say from a company which is situated in a different country where you don't have presence to a company in India, it's a different situation. There also, I think there are quite a few laws that would hit and you can't really do that. Okay, because you have to show on paper what exactly is happening. Because then what will happen is your visa issues would come in. I don't think the visa authorities would want to indulge in disguised employment because that's what we are doing. The law says you cannot hire someone. Okay, fine. I'll go and do that. I'm trying to find a way around the law. So effectively, what I think when it comes to employee leasing, that needs to happen within the country. So if it's Ireland, a company in Ireland will lease its employees to a company in Ireland. If it's India, a company in India will lease employees to a company in India. This, I'm not very sure about the cross-border applicability. Even if there's cross-border applicability, you need a legal entity over there. Even if I'm not saying there has to be a subsidiary, even if there's a branch, you can still get into it, but there has to be some form of entity in the location where you want to actually lease or basically take from someone else or you want to give employees.
So that's very interesting, because I was today researching a little about this, about employee leasing, and it turned out that a lot of companies are offering services, especially digital marketing, web development, and I found companies in Calcutta, companies in Bangalore, companies in Chennai, offering these services where you can have somebody on your payroll, but that person is sitting in Chennai, and you are an American company or a or maybe a UK company or German company, and they have these companies have these leasing companies have their marketing offices and business offices all over Europe and USA, and they would say that we this person is a dedicated resource for you, and he's going to work only on your work, and you can tell him what he would be doing, but he'll be sitting in our office He'll be using our infrastructure, he'll be using our machines, and you just he'll just work for you. And I think this seems to be like a very popular arrangement in terms of that many people seems to be, especially on technology. It seems that a lot of companies are hiring such people. Any views on that?
So I think I would like to draw a distinction over here. There is this form of contracts which is usually known as time and material contracts, and there is a concept called employee leasing. Now, what happens in time and material contracts is that on paper, you are billing for the time that has been put in by your resources. But in actual, the actual deliveries need not be on the instructions of the customer. What can happen is the customer asks you for, say, managed services. You are providing managed services, but you are billing on the number of hours spent by your employees. The next concept is labor leasing. Now, when I was talking about labor leasing, I was talking about the instructions and how are you getting paid for it. Now, when we talk about labor leasing also, now, labor leasing can be from your premises, they can be from the customer premises. Now, when you talk about a country in US leasing certain employees from a company in US leasing certain employees from a company in India, according to me, how this would be structured is that it would be structured as a services agreement. On paper, what you would show is that this US company, this XYZ US company, is procuring services from development services from this ABC company in India, and they are paying this ABC company on the basically the efforts that have been put in by the ABC company. The reason that these people are actually working from their own employers' premises is because this US company does not have a presence here in India. That's what I was talking about. They don't have an entity. So they can't get these people to work on their premises. They have to work from their own premises, but they are billed on the basis of the number of hours they work, and also on the basis of basically they receive instructions from the customer at the end of the day. But it is structured as a services agreement.
So, how is, like, again, it's a very, I'm trying to ask a question very which is basic. How do you differentiate employment leasing or employee leasing from a secondment? Like, for me, it looks like pretty much similar. In a secondment, also, one company sends an employee to another company's office premises where they work under the instruction of the new employer. So, how do you differentiate between secondment and this?
Actually, there's a very major difference between secondment and labor leasing. When you talk about secondment, suppose my company wants to second me to a company called XYZ. What will happen is, on paper, my employment with my company would be suspended, okay? And I would be given an offer letter from this XYZ company. So effectively, on paper, I am on the payroll of the XYZ company for the time period for which I am being seconded. But when we talk about labor leasing, my employer does not change. My employer is the same. And on paper, I am an employee of my company only. My company is responsible for everything when it comes to the employer's responsibilities. But I am actually working under the instructions of XYZ. So the difference is on who is the employer.
Okay, I think I clearly understood that. So now tell me something, like, what are the major issues that you deal with when you draft an agreement for leasing of employees?
So I think there are no major. So major issue is when it comes to labor leasing is across Europe, most of the countries don't allow this. So now when we're talking about labor leasing, there's also a concept of chain leasing. Now in chain leasing, what happens is you take So now there's ABC, there's XYZ, and there is GF. Okay. Now GF gives its employees to ABC. ABC further leases these employees to XYZ. Now in this, what happens is there are three parties involved in this engagement. Every party has its own markup. Every party is making profit out of this. But ultimately, the instructions are being given by the end customer. Now, this is something that is actually not allowed in most of the European countries, but I really don't see any law in India that restricts this. But more or less, what happens when you're drafting a contract when it comes to employee leasing is that you have to first see which country is your customer based in, what is it that is allowed in that country. And every country has certain specifications that need to be followed for those kind of services. Like there are certain countries where not everyone can provide those services. There are specialized agencies who have certain licenses, only they can provide the services. So I think if I have to draft a contract, I start from the very scratch, saying where is my end customer located, where am I to provide the services, whether this is allowed under that country's law or not, and if it is allowed under that country's law, is there any specific license that is required. Once I have got all of this started, then I go on to if they under the law there is any specific compliance that needs to be mentioned in the agreement. But more or less, one thing that is common that I writing in all the agreements that are there for employee leasing is that I retain the authority of the employer. Or if I am taking, say, I have to take these employees from a vendor and then give it to my end customer, I would try and write that the employer authority is not transferred. If these are the vendor's employees, the employer's authority is with the vendor.
Okay, so what are the common points of disputes that arise eventually in these kind of agreements?
Actually, I think the main issue. So when you talk from a commercial contract point perspective, I don't see much issue in this. This is like any other contract. If there is a contract for, say, products, that's also a contract. If there's any issue that can come in that contract, the same issue can come in this also. But I think the major distinction that I draw in these two kind of contracts is that in a contract for products, I am liable for the product. In a contract which is purely labor leasing, I am not liable for the end product or the services that are performed. I am only liable to give the perfect skill set. The customer has asked me for a developer, I can give a developer. I cannot say that the customer told the developer to make something and that is not functioning as per the requirements of the customer. That's not my headache, because you are the one who instructed the developer. You told him what has to be made, how it has to be made. He followed your instructions. So somewhere these are build outs that are there in every agreement. So from an
How do you
agreement,
define the skill level? Because I think I see that that could be a major area of conflict later on. Let's say I said that okay, this person is 5 year experience in Java development. Do I have to guarantee that he's fit for a certain purpose or fit for a certain job? Because that may be expected of me as a professional employer who knows better about the person I'm hiring.
I don't think I would ever like to give such a guarantee or warranty, because we are talking about people over here. People are the they're the most unpredictable ones. You can rely on a product. You can still say that this is how my product will work, but you can never say how a person will work. And everyone has the same. Say if 5 people have passed out from the same college, they have the same skill set, they have the same number of years of experience, but the services and the manner of performing the services for them would be very different. So even if a customer expects you to guarantee or warranty that the skill set would be as per their requirements, and the services would be performed as they require, I don't think that's something possible. Human beings are very unpredictable. Today I
So
can make something
you
which
do
is
not give
amazing.
this guarantee basically.
Yeah, I would not. I would prefer not. I can give a warranty which says that I will give you the appropriate skill set. I will not give a warranty saying that the skill set would perform according to your requirements. Fitness for purposes, I don't think I would like to give in a product contract or a services agreement or even a managed services agreement. That's something I would avoid in any kind of
Lawyers
an
may not
agreement.
prefer to give it, but is it something that clients often ask for, or do you have to concede it from time to time?
Actually, this is something I've not really seen in employee leasing contracts. I've seen this in a lot of other contracts, but not much in employee leasing contracts. So we
Okay,
usually restrict it to the skill set.
got it. And what about what if they are quickly fired? Like if they find out the final employer who has leased, the employee finds that the employee is not performing well. So, let's say within a very short period, like a month or 2 months, doesn't it bring some amount of liability on the original company, the employer company, and how is that issue handled?
I think that is something that you really need to build into the contract you are signing. So when we talk about employee leasing, there are quite a few things that do come up. So all this needs to be built into the contract that you sign. If your customer asks for a replacement, you need to have a provision in your agreement that talks about how this replacement can happen, under what circumstances can the replacement happen, what is the time period for the replacement. Then when you talk about, so there will be certain liability, okay? If I'm not saying that since I'm just leasing labor, I'm not going to be liable for anything. I'm only going to be liable to give you the skill set. If, say, there's a security breach by the person that I am leasing, I will of course be liable. If his performance is not up to the mark, in the sense it's not up to the reasonable industry standards, then I am liable. But if I can prove that the services that are being provided by the employees that are leased are up to the industry standards, I think that should be good enough. And these are actually very ambiguous matters.
Isn't it very hard to prove that your
It
employee
is.
is actually performing up to industry standard? How do you do that?
That's exactly what I was coming to. What I was going to say is that these are very ambiguous matters. This is not something that has a yes or no answer to. It totally depends on how well you have drafted your commercial contract and what are the circumstances in which your customer is alleging that, this employee is not up to the mark or he needs to be replaced. So this is something which is very circumstantial.
But how do these issues get sorted in reality? Like when there are actually such cases and there's an allegation by the client that, this employee is not performing up to the mark, and maybe the skills are not up what you actually promised. This person is not performing at the productivity level of what I'll expect to be a somebody with 10 years of experience in Java development. So when this kind of allegations, and this is common, I mean, it's quite, I believe this is a regular issue that comes up in across the industry. Like there are whole websites dedicated to, how terrible experience people had with Indian developers. So, in those circumstances, how do you deal with it as a lawyer?
So these are circumstances, again, there's no right or wrong in these circumstances. What happens is it totally depends on the relationship that you have with your customer. Okay, if it's a new customer, you will try and, resolve it ASAP and probably, replace the person and say, don't worry, we'll rectify it. If it's a customer with whom you have a long standing relationship, then you would probably try and tell the customer that no, this was up to the mark. These are the reasons why I think we think it was up to the mark. So ultimately, all of this comes down to two parties sitting on a table and sorting it out, because these are it's very difficult to prove performance. As I said, humans are unpredictable. Today I can make an amazing app, and tomorrow when I try to make a similar app, it can be absolutely horrible and not up to anyone's expectations. And it's not because it's my fault, it's just because the circumstances were different. So when we talk about employees, when we talk about labor leasing, when we talk about disputes, there are a lot of things that need to be looked into. And some of the basic things are, sometimes what also happens is human factor. Someone is going through a bad phase in their life and work front also gets affected. So more or less, it's about two parties coming to a table, discussing and sorting this out, because uh, unlike how it is under a normal contract for services or a contract for products, it's very difficult to prove over here whether the performance was up to the mark or not. So even if a customer is alleging that no, this was not up to the mark, the customer has to prove that it was not up to the mark. Just by saying that no, I don't agree to this, that does not really work. So I think for me, the key would be to avoid an indemnity in these circumstances. So when it comes to indemnity, the onus of proof shifts. If there is no indemnity, it is up to the customer to prove that there is lack of performance.
Okay. So lack of performance. So if on the other hand, like let's play devil's advocate here. If you have to show that a technology development person or somebody who's developing a technology or developing or maybe providing online marketing or digital marketing services, and if you have to if you are on the client side and you have to show lack of performance, how would you go about it as a lawyer?
Probably document everything, starting with these were the instructions that were given, and against these instructions, this was what was expected, this was informed to the employee, but this was not delivered. What was delivered was something else and it was not up to the mark. And I think probably one instance would not be enough. So it has to be over a period of time, say 2-3 instances combined. I can then probably allege that, see, this is the written proof, these are the instructions that were given, this is what was expected, this is not what I got. And it's not that it's happening for the first time, it has happened multiple times. So if you can probably give someone with a different skill set, Or probably I can also, what I would do is pick up, if some similar work has been performed in the past, I can pick up those details also and say that in the past this was up to the mark. Here, see, it is not up to the mark.
Right. So, interestingly, I have dealt with several such situations in the past where I was the client, and so usually, you would hire people from platforms like Upwork
Okay.
and others who usually have pretty good documentation systems and very good also arbitration backings. So what happens is, for example, if you Upwork is a platform where you can hire, freelancers to work for you, and you would sometimes hire maybe for front end development or a certain design. And after we hire, so there was one interesting case where a project which was supposed to last 3 months lasted 1 year, and the end
Okay.
product was not what we expected or which was from the beginning. And there have been at least 50 times we have said, here is a bug, here is this problem, here is this problem. Every time they came back and tried to correct it and submit a new version, and every time there was a problem. And this was something that we raised later on when we issued arbitration notice and stuff like that. And it was really easy to prove because Upwork has such a fantastic system of instructions, are all of them are happening on the platform. So you have this huge database of messages being exchanged and new versions being submitted, which goes on to show that there was actually a lot of mismatch of instructions and delivery. So yeah. So I think those kind of technological tools are now there. Like mostly everybody is using project management tools for any sort of development, and it is a rarity that somebody doesn't use a project management tool to develop anything. So I think those things have become easier to show non-performance where somebody has repeatedly failed to comply with a request or comply with a. I mean, they're trying, but what they're submitting is not matching.
See, when we talk about project management tools, having those tools and making proper use of those tools are two different things. What I also feel that sometimes there is a lot of technology around which most of the people don't use properly. They need to know that, okay, this is the tool, should use it properly instead of just taking a shortcut or probably just, dealing with things on the phone that we'll look at this later. कुछ नहीं होता, phone पे बात करके देख लेते हैं. Use the tools so that later on you also have a defense that you did things right when something goes wrong. So you need to think from the worst case scenario perspective instead of thinking that let's just handle this now, we'll see later what happens.
Got it. Very interesting. So, we have gone into the rights of the companies. We have gone into the rights of the companies, which is leasing out employees. But what about the rights about the employees who are actually being leased out? So, can you throw some light on that part as well?
So when you talk about the employees that are getting leased out, that's exactly what I was pointing out. What happens is, if you look at countries outside India, their minimum wages and their standards of payments and payroll is much higher than what we have here in India. So if you are leasing someone out here in India to a company that is not in India, there is going to be a huge disparity in the salary that is being paid to these two guys. So suppose there's a employee with X skill set in India, and there is an employee with the X skill set in US also. So what this employee in US will get and what this employee in India will get, the salary, there's too much difference. That's also one of the reasons that a lot of companies, indulged into labor leasing. Now, effectively, that is the issue that is being addressed in a lot of countries. Like, to give you an example, Germany has equal pay, equal benefits now. So if you're indulging in labor leasing, not only do you need a AUG license, there is also a cap on the time period for which an employee can be leased, and there is a concept called equal pay, equal benefits. So more or less, this is a concept that needs to get developed in more countries. So suppose like in India, since this is something that we know that happens and there is a lot of disparity in the salaries that is there, we need to have a concept of equal pay, equal benefits when it comes to the protection of the rights of the employees. So what will happen effectively is, if a customer wants to lease someone from an Indian company, you have to pay the person the same pay and benefits that you're giving to someone that you have with the same skill set. But then this is something that would be very harmful for the employers, because effectively what happens in employee leasing is they have a markup, they get paid certain amount, otherwise why would anyone indulge in it? Ultimately this is a business, and when we talk about business, everywhere there is definitely an angle of profit. So what happens is, if you get equal pay, equal benefits, it's very beneficial for the employees, but not for the employers. So now it depends on which party you want to think about first.
So what we see is that if the employer is not succeeding, there is no job in the first place. So everybody
Yeah,
suffers. Not only employer but employee also suffers, because if there is no job, then who's gonna pay? And unemployability is a huge issue. Unemployment is a huge issue across the globe right now. So I think it's a creative way to get jobs, and it kind of levels the field for a lot of people across the globe, because we are in a situation where countries which have increased the cost of employers very high have suffered. Like examples are like France, Germany,
definitely.
you know, even there are many other economies which have become non-competitive because of extremely high wages, high labor standards. It may have worked, and again, it works politically very well within the country, because the eventually the political parties are supported for creating better standards. But in the end of the day, when there is more unemployment, and people are not getting jobs, forget the standards. So then it really backfires, and it has happened in many countries where people are actually electing government which will reduce these kind of burdensome labor laws, so that people can actually do better business and employ more people. People can get jobs. So this is something that is to strike a balance about, and those who would think only about the employees' rights without remembering that employers, in the end of the day, if they don't have their business and if their costs are too high, then they would not have the business. And if they don't have the business, there will be no jobs. And entire economies have shrunk this way in the Europe, like where they insisted on very high labor standards, and in the end of the day, businesses shut down and shrunk. Like if somebody, people are afraid to hire anybody in a country like France, because if you hire somebody, the costs are so high to fire them that it's almost next to impossible to uh, do business in that country. And these kind of situations are never good for any business. So, I mean, in a way, uh, leasing of employees gives a leeway to the employer to still manage in those circumstances. Because for the government, even if the government feels it is right to change the law, they are not able to do so because of
Hmm.
political expediencies. So at least this is like a way
Yeah.
out kind of situation.
Yes, and basically what happens is, if you favor employees too much, employers lose out on what they are earning. If they don't earn, they will never have employees in the first place. So if you are regulating something, you, as you rightly said, there has to be a balance between the two things. You cannot just think in favor of one person and ignore the others, because it's the entire economy that gets affected. Now, like you were mentioning, France, Germany, all these countries, it's very difficult. So even if someone is not performing well for, say, consistently for 2 3 years, it is still very difficult to fire such a person, because what happens is they have these concepts called social selection and all of that. So ultimately, for the employers, you have to be overly careful when it comes to quite a few countries. India, thankfully, is nowhere near there. But then for us also, there is always a way around the law. So last year, I think it was all across the news that a lot of people are getting fired, and there are a lot of issues here and there. So I think effectively, you have strict laws, there are issues. You don't have strict laws, there are still issues. So it's difficult to strike a balance, even though striking a balance would be the ideal thing.
The way I see is that if economy is not doing well, or a certain business model is not doing well, then people will lose their jobs. If you try to save those jobs artificially, then you actually lose many more jobs, and you do much more harm to the economy. So we have to let the forces of economy play out, and in the effort to save, let's say, 10 people, we cannot destroy 100 jobs or the entire economy. So I think that kind of pragmatism is needed in our country. So we've got a bunch of questions and we are towards the end of our session. So let's take a few questions. PC
Sure.
Panikani is asking, what's the initial basic contract of such employees with the original employer leasing with them, whereas employees leased may not have such contract with the lessee company? I
Okay.
mean, yeah, uh,
So
yeah,
basically, the employee who is being leased needs to have an employment contract. So I cannot lease someone who's not my employee. So I need to have an employment contract in place with the person whom I want to lease with, to say XYZ. Now, what happens is between me and the employee, I have a employment contract in place. Between me and the customer, I have a services agreement in place. So effectively, the employee need not have an any agreement with the customer. He just needs to have an offer letter from me and be on my payroll.
got it. So we have another question. It says, which are the acts governing such employee leasing? So in India, we don't have any other law except for Contract Labor Act. But yeah, are there any other laws? What about laws in the US and in the Europe?
In India, you just have the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act, which is the 1970 Act. Then across Europe, every country has a law. Across Europe, the nomenclature is usually TAW, which is temporary agency work, or it's TW, a temporary works agency. These are the nomenclatures that are across Europe, and every country these days has a law on this. I think the only two countries which are relatively flexible are Denmark and Netherlands, but all other countries have very strict laws. When it comes to US laws are not as strict as Europe. So when it comes to employee leasing, European laws are the toughest.
Got it. The next question is again from PC Panigra. He's asking, is it more like hiring or HR recruiting, consulting, arranging without basic agreement with the original company by such employees while leasing such employees? Should we deliberate more on extant laws with specific instance of some top corporates utilizing such services?
So I don't think I can give any specific examples of any company utilizing these services, but more or less what happens is this is a commercial contract. It's a contract for services, which says that these are the services that I will be performing for any customer. So I'm not really sure what the question is and what he's trying to ask, but it's a contract for services.
I think he's asking for specific examples. Okay, so specific examples, I would say that there are almost every major company is using this. I know, for example, Microsoft has this kind of arrangements. So does Samsung, and I can think of many companies.
Most of the companies, this is a very common thing. This practice has been going on since a very long time. It's not something new, that it's not a new concept that has come up basically. So I cannot probably name any company because these are their private confidential contracts. But then yeah, I think 90% of the MNCs across the globe must be utilizing these services, because not every company has every capability in house.
Yeah, and they don't want to build such capabilities in house. Just for example, I know for example, Google uses this kind of, like, they have certain copywriting services for the Google ads, and this is something that they I don't know if it is whether it is they're leasing employees or not, but they basically outsource this work to certain companies, and those companies might as well be using you know leased employees. We don't know that, so it's possible, right? So we don't know exactly what
Yes.
arrangements privately companies are having. uh, I think it is not something that they'll be declaring on their filings with the
Yeah, I don't think so, because ultimately this is done under a commercial contract, and every commercial contract has a clause which says that this contract is confidential. And if you want to disclose any contents or even the existence of this contract, you need the consent of the opposite party. So these are company confidential information.
Yeah, and the thing is that these are smaller contracts that do not trigger the threshold required to be disclosed on stock exchanges, which is the case with some other contracts. So you'll never find out about such contracts most of the time.
True.
Next question is from Aarti Shashi. She's asking, in the context of vicarious liability, what is the extent of liability of the vendor for acts of the employee mandated under law? So the professional employer, what is their liability with respect to the employee doing something? You touched on this a little while you were speaking earlier, but do you want to elaborate on this?
So basically, when it comes to the conduct of the employee, so that is something that the original employer will always be liable for. Like I mentioned, if there's a security breach, that is something the original employer will be liable for. If there is any, say, breach of policies, there are certain policies that were supposed to be followed, they are not followed. Again, the original employer will be liable for that. So basically, when it comes to anything to do with the conduct of the person and how the services, basically the conduct, I will not say how the services, the conduct, the original employer is liable. When it comes to the end result, then the original employer is not liable. So when it comes to, say, payment of salary, payment of benefits, payment of PF, original employer is liable. Any breach of statutory duties, original employer is liable. So any breach of, say, regulatory instructions, original employer is liable. So that's the small distinction that you have to draw over there.
What if the employee, let's say, engages in sexual harassment in the final employer's premises, or engages in some sort of, causes damage to property, or engages in data theft, or like any sort of other malicious action or negligent action for that matter?
So these all fall under the category of conduct. So this is what I was talking about. All of this is something that the original employer will be liable for, because this is all related to the conduct of the employee, and these are not related to the performance of services on the instructions of the customer. So when you talk about performance on the instructions of the customer, that is something that the original employer is not liable for. But the original employer is definitely liable for everything else.
What if I try to get off those responsibilities in my contract?
No customer would let you do that. The main reason that they are leasing an employee from a different country is because they don't want to be liable for all of this. So if they're leasing from a different company, why would they want to take on these liabilities? It just defeats the purpose. Then they might as well go ahead and hire someone from the market.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I think, another question by Aarti is, if harm is caused to a third party, the employee will be under the course and scope of employment of the vendor. So does that mean that the vendor will be liable for such harm caused? Yes, this is
Yes.
already answered, right? So the answer is yes. The uh, vendor employer will be very much liable. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of these various questions. Um, Before you go, Shruti, will you like to share your experience and any parting message with our listeners and viewers?
I hope everyone could learn something new from this session. And I hope if once you are done with this, you would take back some new input, something new that you have learned, and some more knowledge. So I hope I've, been able to add a little to your knowledge base. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that was great talking to you, Shruti. Thank you so much, and we hope to have you again on our An Hour with LawSikho.
That
Uh,
would be a pleasure.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and taking out your valuable time. And everybody, please, whoever is watching this, tomorrow we will be live again at 8 to 9 p.m. And we have another very interesting discussion coming up. We will be sharing the update soon. And definitely subscribe to the LawSikho channel, where these videos are visible every day, and so that you don't miss any notification on the interesting discussions we'll be having on different areas of law, opportunities, careers, and everything else. Thank you so much. Good night. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.